welcome to another ASO blog, and welcome to Charlotte,
Thanks.
who is going to be talking today about her research on carers and the Alexander Technique. And a couple of introductions first, I guess. I'm Leslie Glover. I'm a member of the ASO team, as is Charlotte. And the work Charlotte's going to be talking about was a project that we were both involved in. One of the outcomes was a paper, and I'm going to read the title because it's very long. The paper was Extending Understanding of Care as an Embodied Phenomenon, Alexander Teacher Perspectives on Restoring Carers to Themselves. And there's a lot in that title, and hopefully we'll unpack some of that as we go on. But before we do, I just want to acknowledge our fellow author on the paper, who's Emma Wolverson from Hull University. Shall we start just by maybe you giving us a little background to the paper and an idea around some of the concepts in the paper, some of the areas you looked at?
The article grew from data that was gathered from an online survey of Alexander Technique teachers internationally. And it was about dementia, working with people with dementia and working with people who were carers more broadly, not just of those with dementia, but carers in any capacity. And this paper was based on Alexander Technique teachers of working with people who had carer responsibilities. And there were 88 or something like that respondents. So it's quite a big group. Not all of those had experience of care, but quite a few had either themselves as Alexander Technique teachers or having worked with people who they knew were carers of other people. So that was the background. That was in 2020, I think, autumn of 2020, which is ages ago now. So there was this massive data, but it wasn't, because it was Alexander Technique teachers talking about, in many cases, working with carers. It was all a bit sort of distant. It wasn't carers talking directly about their own experience. It wasn't, in many respects, very strong data. Also, the kind of responses that were given, because it was written sometimes quite short and without context, so it was hard to understand exactly what they were saying. But there was a lot in there that was useful and interesting. Anyway, I spent quite a lot of time looking at different kinds of theoretical frameworks and, trying to make sense of it and all the rest of it. In the end, it came down to a riddle or a question, a puzzle, since in most cases, the people who the Alexander Technique teachers were working on, if they were working with and teaching carers, working with, I should say, but were carers, but they didn't necessarily know that perhaps until long into the process. What was it about the technique that made it easier for carers to carry out their caring role effectively if the lessons had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with caring directly? We know the Alexander Technique works indirectly, but what was going on? So it was a riddle, and it seemed like a useful question to try and answer that might be of interest to the readership.
So in a way, what happened was that the data that you got, although it wasn't necessarily strong, acted as a springboard to thinking about care and caring in quite a different way. Where did it take you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess from personal experience and from reading the data, which chimed 100% with my experience in many cases, I saw carers being something which is embodied, it's felt. So it's communicated via non-verbal means, by and large. It's facial expressions, it's touch, it's tone of voice rather than what's said. I mean, people can say really nice things in a tone of voice that conveys that they don't really care. Do you know what I mean? So it's the tone of voice, it's and the way someone looks and the postures and those kind of things. And the way, that it's that conveys whether someone really cares, whether you're really seen and heard by that person. So we're dealing with sort of non-verbal means of communication, and because it was informal carers who we were talking about in the survey. So these are people who are sometimes called family carers, but they might be neighbours, friends, or whatever, usually unpaid. So it's that kind of stuff that we all do at some time in our lives, and that we're all beneficiaries of through various means. And so that's the kind of caring that we are dealing with, that kind of very at home kind of care.
And there's something maybe there about, if people are more embodied in their caring, there's a more authentic sense of connection between the carer and the person being cared for.
Yeah, it has to be embodied. It can't just be, oh right, I'm in carer mode. There was something I read, I remember, referred to the well-practiced head tilt of the consultant as they're listening. So it's like kind of a learned, I'm listening, rather than an actual, I'm listening, not an embodied, I really want to know what you want to say. So yeah, it's very much in the body. It's very much a felt thing for both parties, the cared for and the person who's caring. So that was the first part, I suppose, conceptually. And then there was various other, I won't go into everything, but interoception seemed to be an important part of this. So by interoception, which is defined in different ways by different researchers, but we're basically talking about the connections between the brain and the viscera, the guts, the internal organs, which they're not really well understood. It's something that's only really being researched in relatively recent history. So understanding is sketchy, in a lot of studies, as you know, kind of tend to be fairly reductive about heart rate and stuff like that. But it's about knowing what's happening within our bodies, having a sense of what's going on, and it conveys a lot of information about when we're safe and unsafe and that kind of thing. And we learn this stuff in the early days through our caregivers. So they rock us, they talk to us, they change us, they feed us, they do these things, and gradually you build this sort of sense of what safety feels like, and over time, through contact with others, you learn about what you can and can't do, and what's safe and what's not safe, and what's socially sanctioned and what isn't culturally. So this is a kind of an ongoing process, and you're developing these sort of connections, and it's that, and we talk about gut instinct. It is gut. You think, oh, something not right here, and when you're maybe not safe, and you develop that over time, and as you become more confident in that knowledge, you become more autonomous, and you sort of test out risks and boundaries and that kind of thing, and you learn to navigate the world better, socially, and the social and physical world, I guess. Yeah. So that's interoception, I guess. It's sort of connection between this communication between sort of thinking and your body. Yeah.
And what led you to be thinking about interoception in relation to, this idea of embodied caring?
I think initially I read the book by Van der Kolk, The Body
Keeps the Score.
It keeps a score, and that he talks quite a lot about interoception. I thought, this sort of gave me the first little hint. And then I was reading another book about care as an embodied phenomenon, and just kind of reading and thinking and connecting the dots, really.
And then, so what kind of came out of your researches? What sort of things did you come up with? And I know you've talked about particular skills of care.
One of the books I read was about the phenomenology of care, or the sort of the idea of embodied care is embodied. Hamilton talks about care being embodied skill, which is after sort of the phenomenological perspective of people like Merleau-Ponty, that skills and knowledge are held in the body. So caring is something that, as we are cared for as babies and youngsters, and later on actually in life, as others take care of us in various ways, we kind of hold that, we store up that knowledge in our body, and we can then apply those embodied skills in caring for others. And these skills are things that we can develop. So usually when people have their first child, they're kind of very nervous, but by the time they've got onto the second one, they've developed that skill of caring, they know more about it. So we all, like any skill, you can get better at it, or maybe you never have to care for anybody and you don't really develop that side of your skills. That's where he was coming from. So I use this as a kind of a way of arguing in the article, and then suggesting that maybe where the Alexander Technique teacher, through putting hands on, particularly but not exclusively, I would say, also through things like tone of voice and just their stance and those kind of things, their general poise and whatnot, they are perhaps helping to bolster that interoceptive sense, which has perhaps been somewhat compromised by stress or trauma. Because that's one of the things that Van der Kolk talks about, is, the way trauma can sort of hijack that sort of sense of safety and those sort of brain-body connections, brain sort of organ, whatever connections. Through doing that, you're sort of reminding the person, oh, this is what it feels like to be safe. You can relax in this environment, just sort of reminding them, oh yeah, okay, I remember, this sort of sense of calm and ease. I remember what that was like. I've lost it a bit, but yeah. And then, as we know, what tends to happen then is various other things follow through that. And so I sort of suggest that, but then I go a little bit further with the article and suggest that actually what Alexander Technique teachers have, because they've developed them over many, many years in some cases, is two very specialized embodied habits. And then this is quite theoretical again. It goes back to Merleau-Ponty and what is understood by phenomenology and all the rest of it. But two very specialized habits. One is the ability to foreground the self. So when we are in activity or when we're looking out and doing things, we have this immense capacity to lose ourselves. Humans, you notice what's there and you forget about this, what's here. So what you're doing in the Alexander Technique, you are, through, as I say, a long period of time and a lot of practice, you're developing that ability to keep that sense of self, to keep back in yourself as you work on another. Okay, so that's one. And then the other one is the idea of sympathetic perception. So to be able to observe another in a quiet, calm, non-judgmental, non-reactive way, open, which is so important in feeling cared for, that idea of being seen and being heard. So you learn that as an Alexander Technique teacher. So it seems to me, or suggested in the article, that we've honed these very, very specialized skills, embodied skills, which, if you think about it and what people write about what happens to people in care and this sort of loss of self and all the rest of it, and this sort of problems in power relations between the two parties, you're kind of really targeting with those skills. So if you are in some way, through working with the person as an Alexander Technique teacher, if you are modeling through your own embodied self that ability to stay back in yourself when working on the other person, and that ability to really connect with the other person in an open, non-judgmental way, you are unconsciously and indirectly providing that knowledge, that embodied knowledge, to the carer. Do you see what I mean? So neither the teacher nor the carer is remotely aware of this, because it's happening consciously below the radar, in the same way that we as youngsters learn these things through our parents, friends, peer group, whatever. So it's happening in a totally young. So none of this will ever appear in any data. It didn't appear in any of the data. This is speculative, but it's based on a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, a lot of personal experience, a lot of embodied personal experience. So I kind of feel in my waters, if you like, that it's right, but I can't. There's no proof, no powerful evidence. There's only sort of thinking evidence. There's only sort of theoretical evidence. Yeah.
Well, and theoretical evidence counts for a lot. And I think it's really interesting because in a way what you're doing is you're addressing that sense of, that people who teach or have had Alexander lessons know that something happens, but it's so difficult to put a finger on it. So to move towards that in terms of theoretical understanding and towards explaining that seems really important, really significant to me.
Well, yeah, thank you. It felt very significant to me personally. I thought, aha, I had one of those aha moments that you have when it kind of fell into place. But I did, but it's not easy to explain to people who don't know the technique, because it's experiential, obviously. But what I tried to do in the paper was to sort of say, right, well, this is the evidence, such as it is. This is the argument. This is the explanation. And that has certain implications for how we think about care, or maybe opens up new ways of thinking about what care is. And for me, that was the way to make the paper significant and publishable. Yeah. Because if people are thinking of care interventions as providing carers with knowledge, or providing them with information, or providing them with skills for lifting, or providing them with support groups, all useful stuff. I'm not knocking any of it. It's all very, very important and useful. But the data and the argument begs the question, are there other ways that we can support carers that are working in philosophically very, very different ways? And I could go through some of the implications if you like. So these are philosophical, but I thought they would be of interest to academics who like the current way of thinking to be questioned and things that shed a new light. So I think one is that with the Alexander technique, you're dealing with a person, the whole person. You're not dealing with a carer. You're dealing with a person. And if you're enlightened the idea that carers sort of lose themselves in the caring role and all the rest of it, I think that is significant. So the person can be themselves for the moment they're in their lesson. They're having something nice, enjoyable for them, which is nothing to do with them being a carer. It's for them as a human being, and that's it. So I think that's an important philosophical difference from other carer interventions. Another one I think is the fact that they're learning unconsciously largely. Yeah, they'll be given tips and guidance and things to do, things to think. But a lot of what's going on, if you accept the argument, the theory, and based on experience, and if it's happening unconsciously, it's not another thing that they have to do. Carers are often overstretched, very time poor. They don't have time to go off to a support group. They don't have time to get this information from the internet about how to engage with different agencies and all that. But what it is doing is enabling them to work better and more effectively and be more in control, so that they are then better able to manage whatever problems they're encountering. So they're learning rather than being taught things in a nice unconscious way, which is effortless. I think also if you're providing carers with something, there's a kind of an implication that there's something that they need beyond themselves, that there's something that they don't have. Whereas I don't know that that's true. I think in many cases they do have, and they did have, and they've just got burnt out, exhausted, worn down, and they just need reminding that, yes, they can do it and they do have the capacity. They just need bolstering, reminding of themselves rather than given more stuff. Do you know what I mean? There's not anything wrong with them. They're just worn out by a difficult situation in many cases,
in a way, what you're saying is that if, one of the things that's talked about a lot in the carer literature is that sense of loss of self, then why are we not offering an intervention which is all about restoring a greater sense of self, reconnecting in a more embodied way to the whole self?
Exactly.
And that seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I think which is important is it's dealing with global effects, as you say, through being embodied. So the idea of agency, imagination, choice, those kind of things. So you're not just helping them in their caring role. It's life more generally. So maybe the respondents talked about things like, smiling more, or, sense of joy, or sort of more better sense of humor, those kind of things. So it's sort of changing everything, isn't it? Not just that relationship with that person,
But there's something, I think, in there about as you give people more sense of themselves, then the perspective becomes bigger.
Yeah.
And then it's possible to see the caring element within a bigger picture, rather than that sort of tunnel vision to how are we going to get through the morning or the afternoon, or
how can I help, lifting or whatever it is, those kind of things. So yes, it's a very different perspective, and I thought that would be of interest. Whether it is or not, I don't know, but anyway, so that was that. And I think there are some implications also for Alexander people, more specifically. So I think one is we have some excellent sort of scientific studies now, and sort of people are finding really fantastic creative ways and developing equipment, and writing, publishing, doing fantastic work to sort of raise awareness of the kind of benefits of the Alexander technique and all that kind of thing. But I think this is an example of something that's kind of coming from a different perspective. So I think it's useful to have both things. We need the bottom up, gathering lots of data in lots of different areas, but this kind of top down conceptual stuff is also of value. So I think it's useful to be thinking in both those ways, really. So that's one thing, I think. But when I say that about thinking top down, I think a lot of Alexander technique teachers do think like that. I'm just saying getting it out there in terms of publications is what I mean. So we're sort of tapping into people who are working at that kind of way. And I suppose the other one is more practically oriented. So does this whole idea of restoring interoception and working in this kind of more unconscious way, etc., does it shed any light or help us to think about what we can and can't do sort of virtually? Is there anything unique to the hands-on experience? Does it shed light on that? Those kind of questions, virtual versus hands-on, that kind of stuff. So I think it maybe gives us ways that we can think and tools that we can work with anyway, and maybe stuff that we can research further down the line. I'm not quite sure how, but opens up.
Lots of interesting food for thought and opening up avenues like all the better research. And just such interesting ways to think about Alexander technique, and particularly in the context of caring, but I think it informs our understanding of how we work much more generally with people. So really, really interesting. I don't have any more questions. Do you have anything you feel you want to add, or that's...
Not really. I think I've waffled on long enough.
Well, thank you. It's been really interesting, and I think people will find, a lot of food for thought there.